terrible and wonderful thing.
You're in love.
God, no, not as terrible as that. Some people have been gassed.
And not by Magwild. I fear Parton knows more about the depths of her madness than he lets on. This is Bonekickers. You have been warned. Episode 3, The Eternal Fire, opens with the juxtaposition of England versus Italy in the time of the Romans, and England versus Italy in modern times. Now, I could be offended by someone connecting wholesale slaughter with football, but frankly I'm more amazed that some Italian football fans are able to walk through England after a football match and not get slaughtered wholesale. It's also Valentine's Day. Why? Because this episode is all about love! So of course it had to be set on St. Valentine's Day, in the same way that if they had an Irish guest star, it would be set on St. Patrick's Day. So we're in Bath and there's an earthquake, and how nice! Even the tourists know that this episode features the Romans. Bonekickers. There's foreshadowing and there's beating your audience with a plank labelled "This is what the episode is about. Please stop it." So the earthquake managed to release toxic gas from under the ground and has hospitalised a bunch of people in the town centre. That'll teach them to have romance or have little statue of Romans. And then we hear this.
And authorities are baffled as to how this bizarre and frightening event could have occurred.
The parallel universe where Bonekickers exists, where you can get a doctorate in talking to holes, be drugged by psychic powers, and where people think that a spaceship powered by love is a fair idea, has no idea why earthquakes happen. I know that it looks like I could be using selective editing here, but I'm not. Check the episode for yourself. Now, I'm not going to bitch about the gas being released because, as a rule of thumb, I try not to research my Bonekickers reviews and rely on the knowledge I already have. Because I figure I know more than the writer and their research staff combined, and underground gas being released by an earthquake sounds possible. Possible, but unlikely. At least as unlikely as a dangerous earthquake happening in England anyway. So in the lab, Magwild tut-tut some student archaeologists for giggling and kissing. Apparently the writer felt we needed to be hit with a bigger plank. Yes, this is about love. I get it. Please move on. So Parton comes in and tells her about the gas, and Erga practices a speech, revealing that he's a boring and crap public speaker. Amazing. A boring and crap actor playing a boring and crap character turns out to be a boring and crap public speaker. Who'd have thought it?
Ah, Dr. Magwild, he's boring. Make his speech better.
They get rid of Daniel Mastiff by telling him there's a man outside the room looking to give his department a grant. I'm not convinced that this'll work because he'll just leave the room, immediately see there's no one there, and then come back and demand an explanation. This can only work if A, he's so stupid he goes off looking for the man who Magwild said would be there, B, they climb through the window and down the wall in the time that it takes him to leave the room, look around and return, or C, he returns to the room and yells at Magwild and then she ignores him and runs off anyway. Since they cut right to the city centre, we'll never know which of those happens. And no, the fact that Magwild lied to and wasted the time of her boss is not mentioned when he reappears at the end of the episode, so we can see that Erika is suddenly the greatest public speaker ever. Because that's apparently a story arc. So they all go to the Roman baths, which Bath is named after. The earthquake opened up a hollow area beneath the baths that they'd never been able to get access to.
There's a hollow area under these baths. We've never had a chance to get at it until now.
And Magwild is convinced that Boudica, the famous Celtic warrior queen, is buried under there. And because she's the main character, and this show long ago decided that reality was optional, she is of course going to be proved right. So they're at the baths, and even though the earthquake opened up a hollow area right beneath them, none of the water that you find at the baths has managed to seep down into the newly opened hollow area. Now, I'm not an expert in anything besides insulting things, but surely if you have water and a hollow area right beneath it, and then a crack connects the two areas, then surely your water is going to end up in the hollow area below. So they meet up with a geologist who tells them that the baths have been evacuated because of the gas. They ask if they can investigate the hollow area which should be flooded, and he says no because of the gas, and crap like that. He then pisses off, leaving our heroes alone in the baths. Now, as I understand it, natural gas is usually something that you find a lot of when you find it. Why the hell have they evacuated the building without first finding a way to stop the gas pumping into the centre of a majorish British city? And why has he left a group of people who just asked him if they could go into the hollow area alone, beside the entrance to the hollow area, when it's that fucking dangerous? Because this is Bonekickers, bitches! They go down into the hollow area.
This is the first time these walls have been illuminated by electric light.
Except for those electric lights which were already on before you got your torches out. Those electric lights which were already there waiting for you. Or perhaps you've just spent the last hour setting up, getting a generator and hooking everything up. Oh, and given that you're down there in secret, perhaps you should have stuck to torches. They don't need generators that are as loud as fucking cars. And why can't we hear the generator? Have they actually broken into the main building and laid cable to power these lights? Because that's as fucking unsubtle as a generator! So Erga, Parton and Magwild argue over whether the Romans or the Celts made this cave, because it really is that easy to tell who carved a 2,000-year-old cave in solid rock just by looking at the walls with a fucking torch. They then talk about how the Romans like to eradicate the people and religious beliefs of those that they conquered.
Subjugate the people, eradicate their heritage. That's the Romans. Brutal, thorough, effective.
Which is pretty much bullshit because the Romans were extremely pluralistic. They were fine with other gods and beliefs as long as the people recognised that their gods existed and were the best. Daniel Mastiff phones Magwild and doesn't mention the fact that she just lied to him and threatens to fire her if she doesn't make sure that Erga's speech is brilliant, because his priorities are obviously in the right place. Oh, and they're under fucking ground and the mobiles work. So Erga and Magwild keep arguing because while Magwild is convinced that Boudica will be found here, even though she died at least 100 miles away after her last battle with the Romans, Erga keeps trying to remind her that she's supposed to be some sort of a scientist. And that immediately deciding that a famous Celtic warrior queen who died 100 miles away will be found buried underneath a Roman bath constructed while she was still alive is pretty fucking stupid. Yes, I know that the actual baths in Bath aren't technically Roman. I mean the baths that the Romans constructed over the Celtic ones back in 60 AD. So they find a symbol of the Celtic sun god buried in the ground because Magwild's theory just has to be right, and they decide that this means it's Celtic holy ground. In the same way that in 2,000 years, if some archaeologist finds a giant T used on Sesame Street, that means that Sesame Street was actually a church. So Viv Davis, the archaeology graduate, gets Boudica's name wrong.
Boudica.
And you were doing so well.
Which is something so stupid that frankly no English-speaking graduate of any subject with anything to do with history would do, except possibly for irony, and then immediately becomes a genius by pointing out that Boudica killed herself after being defeated, 100 miles away. Magwild has decided that the Romans invented the suicide story to dishonour her, even though the Romans viewed suicide as an honourable death, and they would have loved to take her alive, drag her to Rome and give her the full Vercingetorix treatment. But yeah, Magwild is still right because this show is retarded.
Oh, you cannot know Boudica was here.
Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith.
Or simply go on the evidence in front of you.
Oh, you're scared, Ben. Scared to take a leap.
You are the worst scientist ever. Seriously, at scientist conventions, you are the one that doctors Insano, Lysenko and Milgram keep away from because you make them look bad. Fuck you, Magwild! So they find a skeleton and Davis and Parton take the findings up to the lab because the script demands that the team separates, and then because this episode is all about love, we get scenes with Erga and Magwild talking about the fact that they used to date. Did you know that? No? Well, that's okay because I'm pretty sure that no one else knew until this point as well. So why does Magwild think that Boudica's here, apart from the fact that Boudica is famous and Bath is where Magwild lives? Well, Parton has a Victorian copy of a book by a man called Marcus Quintanus who helped build the baths. He claims to have had 2 prisoners underneath the baths. One was a woman. Because Boudica was clearly the only woman a Roman would ever want to keep prisoner, or possibly the only woman in Roman Britain at the time, Magwild decided that it must have been her. Who was the second prisoner? I really don't know, but I'll get onto that later on. So there's another earthquake and the second chamber is opened up. Magwild, of course, climbs in. Their way back to the surface has begun to crumble, so Erga, of course, follows her. Where, of course, they get trapped. Good on you geniuses. It was around now that I realised that the cave set that they were using was the single worst cave set I've ever seen outside of classic Doctor Who, and classic Doctor Who was made decades before on about 1% of the budget. Go Bonekickers. Back at the lab, Parton does some strontium tests on the skeleton that they found. They claim that it allows you to work out where someone's food and water came from while they were growing up. It sounds plausible enough, but since this is Bonekickers, I've come close to insulting it on principle. Anyway, within hours it reveals that the body came from Rome. Not just a Roman, but a Roman from actual Rome. What the fuck are the chances of that happening? The Roman Empire was massive and military service was a way for a conquered person to become a citizen. Did the makers think that we couldn't handle a Spanish or African Roman, or even a Roman that came from another part of Italy? And now I think about this, why didn't they use this on the dead Saracens in episode 1 or the slaves in episode 2? It seems a damn sight more efficient than all that bullshit running around that they did. So we start getting flashbacks to Boudica being held captive by Marcus Quintanus, who captured her after burning down the village that she was hiding in. Because this episode is all about love, they fall in love. Now, even though I've already complained about Boudica being held there when she died 100-odd miles away, sometimes I like to flog dead horses. What the fuck? And why are they in love? Why? They might as well have had Jefferson Davis captured by Ulysses S. Grant, locked in a hole, and have them fall in love. This makes just as much fucking sense. Now, the guy playing the Roman is okay. He's meant to be a Roman nerd / inventor, even though the Romans weren't that big into inventions and mainly saw them as amusements. He certainly looks the part of a Roman nerd. If the Romans had Star Wars, he would have his own Boba Fett outfit. But Boudica? She's supposed to be at least middle-aged by Roman standards, meant to be a Celtic warrior queen, born a fuckload of kids, survived assault, rape, torture, led an army, and personally slaughtered unarmed people. A fucking army wouldn't follow this woman down a catwalk at a fashion show. This is not Boudica! So Parton decides to do some investigating into Marcus Quintanus, seeing as he only has a 19th century copy of his book, and so he contacts a friend of his with a 17th century copy, where they have found hidden writings underneath the main text. Hidden writings that say that he betrayed Rome, writings that his slave tried to remove after he died in the Great Fire of Rome, replacing it with the official version that Parton has. Here's the problem. The woman said that her copy with all the hidden writings is 17th century. Either the slave did all this while aged 1,700 years, or someone copied the book complete with newly discovered secret writings that Parton knew nothing about at some point before the 17th century. So Erga and Magwild somehow commune with Boudica and Quintanus, and this rekindles their feelings for each other. Don't worry, the chances are this won't continue past this episode. The gas that the script forgot about until now returns and forces them into another chamber. Yes, they have just outrun poison gas, and I'm getting flashbacks to the happening. But they're safe, at least until it returns from dramatic necessity. In the other chamber, they find that organic material has become mineral fossils through some sort of a process involving calcium carbonate, which might actually be real. Though I'm pretty sure it wouldn't leave it pink and sparkling. Even though it only works on organic material.
No, only organic material.
It's somehow covering the walls. They find some small, interesting metal devices that they can't identify on the ground. Being the world's worst scientist, Magwild does this. Yes, ancient hand grenades that still work, after all these years. At least we now know where this came from.
Yes, of course! The Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch! 'Tis one of the sacred relics Brother Maynard carries with him.
So the gas returns and they go down a corridor littered with the grenades. Magwild decides to bring up the time that she proposed marriage to Erga. What fucking timing! He's trying to avoid standing on a landmine!
Maybe you could have chosen a more convenient time to discuss this.
Well, no, Ben, because actually, this terrible place is all about love.
And so is this terrible episode! Fucking hell! Just stand on a grenade, please! So they get across the corridor and unfortunately aren't exploded in the process and find Boudica, looking deader, gayer and more sparkly than 100 Twilight vampires. They also have decided that she's the queen of all the Britons when actually she was just queen of the Iceni, one of the many Celtic kingdoms in ancient Britain. Back on the surface, Parton and Davis find out that Magwild and Erga are trapped, even though earlier on they used their phones underground and they could have been informed about this hours ago. So they tell the geologist, who runs off to get help, and we get a zoom on the water as if to remind us that it really shouldn't be there anymore. So a Roman general, cleverly travelling without guards, has had suspicions that Boudica is living in the hollow area under the baths. Because of magic. And so he finds her! He's going to take Boudica back to Rome in chains. Why doesn't he have guards? Because he assumed that one of the most badass warrior queens in history would come quietly. She proves him wrong by killing herself, and then Quintanus kills the general. Now remember earlier on when they said there was a second prisoner? Well, I think this guy is supposed to be the second prisoner, but I don't think killing someone and leaving their body in a hole really constitutes taking him prisoner. So either there was no second prisoner and that bit was left over from an earlier draft of the script, or the makers of Bonekickers think that killing someone and leaving their body in a pit is the same thing as keeping them prisoner. So Parton works out the location of a second way into the hollow area because Quintanus said that it was near the sun god. The sun god, which is on the wall of the modern baths, but has almost certainly been moved at some point in the last 2,000 years during one of the many reconstructions the baths have had. So the geologist begins to cut his way down to save Erga and Magwild, but of course the roof begins to collapse, which won't just crush them but set off the hand grenades. So now it's a race against time. Will Parton find them before they're crushed, poisoned, burnt and blown up? Of course he will, and while doing so he reveals that the hollow area underneath the baths is actually above ground level and above the baths, showing that this series doesn't even know what the word underneath means. So they all escape. The police recognise them as the ones who killed Edward Legas and burned the cross, and they figure that if they didn't go down for that, there's no way in hell they're going to go down for breaking and entering and wasting police time, and so let them go. On the way back to the lab, Parton reveals that Quintanus returned to Rome and that no one missed the Roman general he killed, and that Quintanus used his grenades to set the Great Fire of Rome to avenge Boudica, because killing thousands to avenge a suicide is fucking awesome.
Boudica won.
Erga and Magwild continue being all coupley. Erga gives her a balloon, which if you look carefully, he doesn't actually pay for. And finally, we see the payoff to the speech arc. Erga is now an awesome public speaker who sees the value in making massive, unscientific leaps that aren't supported by the evidence because this is Bonekickers, and Magwild's insane and retarded attitude to science is apparently brilliant. As an epilogue, we see that Boudica used Excalibur. Why? One-line explanation in 3 episodes' time. And yes, it's stupid. This episode is awful. Just like the last 2, the history on display here is painful. But this one's particularly offensive for taking the attitude that the scientific method and evidence is inferior to crap you make up. Fuck you, Bonekickers! This doesn't deserve a mark out of 10. That was Bonekickers. You were warned.
Cultural delegation from Iraq.
I am here for something so important. We were the cradle of civilization.
We had sex twice.
That's the one. Babylonian devil worship. If she's with him, then her life is at risk.
Did you get to wear a cape and a mask?
Damn that woman!
Sorry, mate.
So important, a man has died over it.
Where is she?
I've got an Etruscan spear in my hand and I'm not afraid to use it.
You don't know what's at stake.